Hi, my name is Clare and I'm the mother of 3 teenagers with FASD.
I'm Jessica, a PhD researcher specialising in educational interventions for children with FASD.
And together we are the hosts of a Spotlight on FASD, the UK's first podcast dedicated to shining a spotlight on fetal alcohol spectrum disorders.
FASD is a condition caused by prenatal alcohol exposure that affects hundreds of thousands of children across the UK.
And we're here to bring these conversations out of the shadows and make sure that no one living with FASD feels alone.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the next episode of Spotlight on FASD. This week we are going to be talking all about sensory needs, and in particular when it comes to FASD, sensory processing difficulties, sensory processing challenges. You'll hear this described in many different ways, but the sensory challenges that come with having FASD or being prenatally exposed to alcohol at least. This is something that I've actually seen a few times as a standalone diagnosis. So when children that I've come across who haven't had a diagnosis of FASD hasn't been mentioned in, their paperwork, let's say. But sensory processing disorder is there. Now, sensory processing disorder or sensory processing difficulties is really common part of FASD, and it's very much an integral part of moving forwards with their care, their support, and it's just really essential for whoever is providing that support and that care of the individual to have a really thorough understanding of sensory needs and how many different aspects of an individual's life that can be impacted.
Yeah, I would say my life is ruled, my every waking moment is ruled by the sensory input that is surrounding my kids. And I think that when I'd heard of sensory processing disorder, and I know a lot of people, some people don't like that sensory processing disorder, some parents don't like it, some professionals don't like it, some people use that, some people use sensory processing difficulties or differences, but in a nutshell it is when your brain and your body can't cope in what is deemed to be an appropriate way with the sensory input that it's getting. So what it's hearing, what it's smelling, what it's feeling, and it just overwhelms. And I think that this is something that I can't talk about enough, because it's an area that I knew about it, and I knew it was kind of, you would hear people talk about it quite a lot with autism, and but it was something that I never ever linked to my kids. When I look back now, it really does make us laugh. From day one, their sensory needs were so massive, but I had nothing to compare that to, and that was motherhood for me, where it was just, without thinking, I would just have to cut out every label on pajamas, underpants, pants, quite often turn socks inside out so the little seat was the other way. I would be shopping and I'd be like, oh no, that's too ridgy, that's too bumpy, that's too stiff, that's not smooth enough. And I would just instinctively and it was just like for me at that time, it was just like, oh, my little girl prefers purple to red, so I'll pick that one. That was just what they preferred, their preferences. But when I look back now, one of my earliest memories of me middle boy is him really what to me looked like a massive tantrum when he was about 2, a totally what looked like an appropriate terrible twos tantrum. And it was all about the waistband on a pair of trousers, on a like a little pair of jeans, and the like adjustable ones with the adjustable elastic, and he'd had a little growth spurt. I hadn't adjusted the elastic, and he'd sat down to eat his dinner, and it must have been digging in, like it must have just been digging in. And
we all know that feeling.
Yeah, it's definitely a lockdown. But he literally couldn't cope with that feeling. Like it wasn't that's uncomfortable. Like it wasn't or even at 2 years old, it would be like there would maybe be a cry, or they would try and let you know that something was hurting or it didn't feel right. This was the end of the world for him, and I think that was the point that we moved to elasticated waist tracksuit bottoms, and like 13 years later we've never gone back. But I never ever paid it I never gave it the weight that it should carry. I really didn't, and that was just my lack of knowledge around it and my lack of education around it. And even when I got an FASD diagnosis for the kids, and then you get your diagnosis, and it's at the minute not always going to be like this. There's no pathway to go down. There's no these are the next steps. This is what we need to look at next. So I had to start and do my own research and okay, this is what's going on. So what do I need to look at? And when I used to look at OT, which is occupational therapy, I used to think that was I thought that had absolutely no relevance to children, but then certainly not to my children, because I always used to think that occupational therapy was something that happened when you were an adult and you were in a job and you weren't able to do your job because of illness, and someone kind of had to come and check out what your workstation or work with you. So I really I didn't think it had anything to do with my kids. So I was concentrating on kind of ears and hearing and dental care, focusing on getting EHCPs in school for support in school. And it was mentioned, an OT assessment, and this further fed into my lack of knowledge around it. My eldest son got an OT assessment, and it really wasn't a very good one. And it didn't really explain anything. It certainly didn't explain to me. It was done in school. He was observed in school, and so it didn't really explain anything to me. And I got a little letter that said he could maybe wear a hoodie in class with his hood up, and in school we're like, I don't know how helpful that's going to be. Probably going to be a bit distracting for the other kids if he's got a hoodie on with his hood up, and it was just a bit useless. And so that was still just filed away to me as like, well, I did actually think that was absolutely useless. So that's not what my kids need. So carrying on down the journey, and then I started to realise with my daughter, she was able to explain to me her sensory needs, and I started to realize what a big deal it was. And then you can say fluke or you can say the universe, and I'm going to choose to say the universe. The universe decided it was time for me to meet a woman who changed everything for us, and she was an NHS occupational therapist in the same team that had assessed my son years before, but she's a Canadian lady and she'd done her training in Canada. So first of all, she knew what FASD was. Yep. The previous OT didn't know what FASD was. But mainly, she looked at sensory needs, and she looked at her role as an occupational therapist completely linked to attachment and trauma. And she was just... She was like a savior that I clung onto, and she's still somebody that I stay in touch with now, because this sounds dramatic and I'm not wanting to be dramatic, but she absolutely changed everything for me with my daughter. Everything. She involved me in the assessment, and it was as if she was getting a little bit excited because she was going, oh my goodness, off the charts for this. And she was doing the assessment. She was like, oh, look, see what she's doing there. So she was just playing. She was having a lovely time playing. And it was like a huge, big soft play area, and there's swings and there was everything indoors. and she was having a great time. She was going, see what she's doing there. But the most important thing that she did was with me.
Yeah.
See what she's doing there? This is why she's doing that. Do you ever notice that? Does she hang upside down off the sofa, or does she ever do it? And I'm like, yes, they all do. And she was like, right, well, I need to see them all, because this is, I'm going to be able to give you so many tools, and we never looked back. And that's when, at that turning point, she probably done us the biggest amount of good of anyone. I know she felt like, she was like, oh, I just wish I could do more. I wish I could physically do some stuff with them. But she made me understand the importance of, like I mentioned to you before we started to record, my eldest son, from about the age of 4 to about 7 or 8, until he reached a height where it didn't happen anymore. I could never understand why he smashed his face in every car wing mirror that he walked past without fail. And I'll be going, you can see where it is, just move in a little bit from the foot, move in the footpath. And every time he'd get this shock, and there would be tears, and he'd smashed his face, and it was just like, it just begged belief that he was still doing it, and you've just been walking towards it. And she made me understand about proprioception, one of you, where you can't work out where you are in relation to other things. So that instantly explained why everyone in my house tripped up, fell over, banged into everything, why they were covered in bruises. And it made me realise that for so long, I don't know how many times I told them off for not paying attention, and for spilling the drink, or for dropping, or for tripping up and dropping the plate. And they were things that they had no control over. So it plays such a huge role in FASD. I cannot put enough emphasis on it, on getting a really good OT assessment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sensory, like as Claire's described there. I mean, you spoke about the touch and sensations of labels on skin and certain types of clothing and things, and then like proprioception, everything. But it's literally everything. It's how your brain absorbs all the information around you. So sensory processing, if you think of your 5 senses, if they're all working in balance with each other, and we all go through phases, like everybody goes through phases, or naturally we might have slightly stronger senses in one area than others, where they're not quite balanced. But in all these areas, your brain is drawing in information, processing it, and that is how your brain then tells your body to react to the world around you. So in the example there of Claire's eldest son with the wing mirrors, the car wing mirrors that he kept hitting, his eyes were telling him that they were there, and it was probably not being processed quite right in his brain. But at some point, whether that was a proprioception problem or a processing difficulty or whatever it was, his brain wasn't able to tell his body that he needed to step in on the path to avoid it. And that, would be happening, as Claire said, like time and time again. And it wasn't that he wasn't paying attention, and it wasn't that he wasn't learning from that mistake, which is probably a whole other area of FASD that we don't quite need to go into in this episode. But your brain simply cannot process. So if we think about, all of us, we come in from work or, do whatever we do. We get to 6 o'clock at night, we walk into the kitchen, the food's cooking, dinner's in the oven, and you can smell it. And it's one of those meals that you just love. Your brain tells you instantly. Your tummy might start rumbling, and you're like, oh, you get all excited for dinner time, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm really ready for dinner. And you realize that you're hungry, and you start that process towards eating a meal. And it's something that we all do without any awareness whatsoever, without any conscious awareness of any of it, really, to the point where we're eating. But if your brain can't process those smells, or if those smells to you are are processed very differently to the taste. So you know that it's something that you enjoy the taste of, but you don't enjoy the smell of. Those two aren't connecting. Or you have oral sensitivities. The smell is something that you love and it's delicious, but when you put it in your mouth, it feels like, you know, all of a sudden your like creamy, delicious lasagna feels like sandpaper, because it's just not a food that you can process. Like, it's just not a food, like it's just too much. You know, it's every single aspect of life, isn't it, really? Like, it's, you know, you're drawing in these things from...
When I think about it, the overwhelming feeling for me always is this, like, obviously drenched in man guilt from morning till night, but I think of all of the times that I told my children off for the way they were responding to things, thinking they were just being silly. Stop being silly. It's not hurting you. That isn't hurting you. What I now know, because when you know better, you do better, I know that it actually was hurting them. And I was telling them that that was silly and to stop. And then I wondered why bedtime took 5 hours.
Yeah.
Because something was hurting them. I was telling them to stop being silly. And like, how scary must that have been for them when they were little, when I didn't understand what was going on for them? And they certainly didn't understand it. They just knew that the senses, because when you, I know I always talk about trauma, but when you include trauma in the mix, that a lot of their emotions, trauma and attachment, anything, any strong thing that's happening to them, so a smell, a sound, like it just creates this huge big knot of something right here, and unless that's broken down and explained to them, they can't work out what it is. So it could be that they are smelling something delicious, which makes their body realize that it's hungry, and that flips them into a massive muddle.
Mm-hmm.
That you're thinking, what on earth is happening here? That's your favorite food, and they can't explain what's just happened, and it's just sensory overload. And I think,
yeah, sensory overload.
Mm-hmm. And so sensory overload doesn't have to be something negative. In my experience with my kids, it's the positive reactions that are the most powerful and that cause the biggest overload, so cause the greatest difficulty. So you like, it's just everything that your common sense would tell you to imagine, oh, it must be that. Flip that on its head, and that's what it'll be. It'll be the total opposite to what you imagine it's going to be, if that makes any sense at all. But I think that once I got, certainly for my daughter, once I had a basic understanding of what to look for and what was going on, whether I had then got an assessment for the boys or not, I knew what path to go down. I instantly changed the cutlery. Instantly.
Yeah.
I instantly changed the pens and the pencils that I was trying to get them to write with. It just in an instant, I changed my whole attitude about eating, what it looked like, what they ate looked like, where they ate it, how they ate it, who they ate it with.
Yeah.
I just changed it all, and I think I can't help but link their sensory processing differences a lot of the time to food, because when my kids are in sensory overload, quite often one of the fastest ways to stabilize things is a little tray of snacks. And this has changed as they've got older, but a little tray of snacks, because if they are in overload, they're using loads of energy, so they are going to be hungry. A tray of snacks, and it might, with a huge sensory input to them. So like red peppers, like really, really crunchy, couple of marshmallows, like some really juicy grapes, so like some crisps, some creamy cheese, little bits of those on a tray, and where they're getting the literally getting the sensory fix of the crunches, the change in temperatures, a really icy cold drink in a cup with a straw, so they've got to do like a sucking sensation, you know, and I just had no idea how something like drinking a drink through a straw could set off a chain of events in your brain that can help to ground and calm. And you know, so I feel like I need to apologize to the world of OT, because I dismissed it for a long time, and actually it has been the biggest key in unlocking me being able to help my kids with their lives, so that, you know. And I think I said to you what I want to acknowledge, because the idea is that we're talking about sensory processing and FASD, and we're kind of opening it up, and then we're going to do, you know, over the weeks, some in-depth episodes about what does sensory processing differences and FASD look like in school, in the home, you know, out and about, lots of different scenarios and what it looks like, and and some strategies and tips of how I deal with it. But I think that I kind of wanted to acknowledge that even when you know what it is and you're like, right, okay, so I know what I need to do. I need to keep up the snacks, like kind of like toddlers, not let them get too hungry, because that is you know, when the body's hungry, so it makes them tired, but also you've got these hungry feelings. That is a sensory overload that their FASD brain can't process, to say like, oh, I'm just a bit peckish. It's just, oh.
And we're talking about an FASD brain not being able to process something as well. We're triggering that fight or flight response.
Yeah.
Which
So
is where the muddles, they're called in Clare's household, where they come from. So we're constantly on the verge of fight or flight anyway. But
that's just made me, I've actually just got the hairs on end on my arms, because that has just whipped me into a time hole and taken me back to Florida, specifically to Gatorland in Florida, so full of thousands of alligators on one side of me, and 8 lanes of traffic on the other side of me. And that was the location I was in when I learned and fully understood for the first time that hunger to my children felt exactly the same as terror, because it flipped them into fight or flight. And that was when I had probably a 10-year-old running away from me, and one side of him was 1,000 alligators, and another side of him was 8 lanes of traffic. And if my sister's listening to this, I'll just sucked her back into that time hole again, and she will be back in there, terrified, in that car park, thinking, what do we do? And it was hunger. And that was one of the scariest and most valuable lessons I ever learned about the power of the senses, and how, you know, so anyone can have sensory processing differences, anyone, but we're specifically talking about how an FASD brain processes and copes with that. And so when you know, it literally is like getting a magic key.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can fix a situation with a shower that lasts an hour, and before I knew what I knew, I would have went mad at a shower that lasted an hour. What are you doing in the shower? Get out. You don't need to be in there for that long. Now, you know, I will take drinks into a shower, because that is a massive, it's a therapy session. It's a massive therapy session. So I got a massive shower fitted to make sure that when that was needed, they were able to do that. So when you know you are able to turn things around with some of the simplest things like food and water. But I think what I really want to talk about as well is, I don't want to make this sound easy, because this week in particular, I have struggled to pull the energy to meet sensory needs. A lot of people, you'll hear people talk about a sensory diet, and I used to think that was literally food, like a food diet, but it's not. It's sensory input that a child or a person might need throughout a day to keep them regulated, depending on if they're too high or too low. That's how my daughter would explain it. And I think that what I know for FASD, certainly for my children, is tone of voice is everything. Language, facial expressions, your body language, it is everything. But when you are exhausted and you've had less than 4 hours sleep and you just don't know how you're going to stop this next muddle from erupting out of the bedroom, potentially out of the house, and you're on your own trying to deal with it, to pull out like your Miss Honey voice and to keep it calm and to keep the language calm, and when you are being screamed at and swore at, and to really keep things calm and to just focus on getting them what they need. Sometimes it is difficult. It is difficult to do, but I've never ever been in a situation where I haven't regretted not being able to pull it out of the bag, because when you don't and when you're not able to, though, if you look back, anyone who was caring for a child with FASD, when you look back, you'll be able to see a lot of the time, when muddles happen, some people might want to call them like an episode or a meltdown, but when a muddle happens, that's what we call them. I can look back and without a shadow of a doubt, I can pinpoint where the adult dealing with them, say the me or their dad or a teacher or whoever was dealing with them, I can pinpoint where it all went wrong, and it will be with a tone of voice or agitation creeping in, but no one does that on purpose, so it's unavoidable when you are dealing with this all the time and you're exhausted. But I want to point that out, not from a negative point of view, but just to back up what I'm saying about the power that meeting sensory needs holds. So if you are able to meet those sensory needs, so many other aspects of life kind of just fall into place. And I always underestimated the power of it, and now it is the priority. Like it's literally all I talk about. Sensory. That's not sensory. That's not sensory enough. That's not. No, don't talk like that. Don't look like that. Take that coat off. You're gonna have to get washed.
It's huge, though. It is. It's, as we've been saying, like it's huge, and you've got 5 senses. We've all got, well, most of us have around 5 senses, and we've got, then we're considering sensory input, sensory output. We're then considering hypersensitive needs, hyposensitive needs. There's so many things that you're balancing here that will very, very rarely come into line, but you have to know to be able to manage those. I'm doing this with my hands, like you are like a puppeteer of all these things going on around them, because they can't manage that, they can't express that, or they're too close to that fight or flight point to say, I need you to talk quieter, I need you to change your tone of voice, I need you to dim the lights, I need you to make that smell go away. You can't make the smell go away because it's the furniture polish that was used 3 days ago, because their sense of smell is so sensitive that it's not something that you can manage beyond never using that furniture polish again. Or it's another person, or you can hear your next door neighbors through the wall. There's so many variables at different times of the day, depending on hunger, sleep, how the rest of their day's going, influences from siblings, other people in the house, that will set them off very quickly. So, we could go from 0 to 100 very, very quickly, or it could be gradual enough for somebody to step in and, you know, bring it back down and, you know, not be in the Florida situation that Claire described.
No children were harmed in that situation, can I just say? We did pull it back round.
And no traffic harm, no gator harm. Everybody was fine.
I've just never been covered, but everything was fine.
But, you know, quite often you will start, and I say this, I'm not saying this as a parent or caregiver, obviously, I'm saying this as a very, very temporary caregiver. But once you know, once you understand that what you're looking at is sensory needs, it suddenly doesn't become a problem if a child wants to walk 2 miles down a gravel road completely barefoot, because that's a sensory input that they need in that moment. And I've learned a lot, like, you know, I have to try and separate this all out in my head from FASD and yoga. So I am a trained yoga teacher, and we talk so much about the senses and how yoga impacts the body, and how you know, calming and grounding certain poses are, and how the more points of our body and our skin that are on the ground or on the yoga mat, the better, the more calming and the more relaxing, and, you know, all the energy just comes down. And, you know, and I know that I have, you know, my yoga mat that I've had for probably about 5 years now. And as soon as I take my socks off and step onto my yoga mat, instantly energy levels are in the right place. My body knows exactly how to respond to the sensation of that thick rubber yoga mat under my bare feet. And as soon as I'm at a position where I've got even more, you know, body parts on the ground, I'm lower to the ground, it all starts to come down. And that's, you know, it's not something you can't turn around to a child with FASD and be like, right, child's pose now. They're not going to be like on the floor in a supermarket, you know, with their forehead on the floor. But it's, you know, it's about understanding it for yourself, I think, as well. Like, if you can get a real grasp of your own sensory needs to a point where you can empathize to an extent with what they're experiencing, then it gives you like that tiny
and I think
little insight.
When you talk about understanding your sensory needs, sometimes people may think like, well, how do I do that? But triggers are a word that people can understand.
Yeah. So
it made me understand what my triggers are. And obviously I live in a state of high anxiety a lot of the time, juggling what I juggle, and doors being closed and car doors being closed outside, any kind of a bang, they are triggers for me. So I now know, like, if someone's leaving my house, I will go, I'll just follow you out because I've got a Yale lock on a massive big wooden front door. And if they pull that shut, the noise shudders through the whole house. But that is a trigger for me. And I recognise that now. So I'll go with them and I'll turn the Yale lock and I'll close it quietly, and then that doesn't trigger me. And, you know, we joke about, you know, your child maybe finding the place where they're totally at calm with all the senses, being on a yoga mat, and like, how lovely would that be? Because you could have a child who finds their spot where everything is calm for them, and it is chest height in the North Sea. With you standing next to them, chest height in the North Sea. So I have one of those children where we discovered that being in the freezing cold North Sea, standing braced in the sand, holding your own against the waves, that was the most common place that he could be. And until I got in there with him up to my neck, because he's way taller than me, and had to brace myself to pretend that I'm in control of this, is fine, I want to be here with you, actually thought I was going to die.
Yeah.
I then realised, as I started to go numb with the sea, and I realised that the effort I was having to put in is to steady myself, like the core power that I was having to use, it was like, oh, I totally get this. I totally get why this matches what's going on inside of him, and therefore it cancels that out and it levels it all off.
Yeah.
So, you know, it is really, really, really powerful stuff, and it's something like we've said we're gonna unpack this in a series of episodes about specific areas. So we definitely want you to get in touch with us if you've got anything specific sensory wise that you want us to unpack and talk about. If there's anything that you can that you would like us to find out about or to cover, please get in touch with us.
Or if you've got any examples, because obviously examples from, you know, directly from those parents and carers and people of what they've come across that they never would have thought would be a sensory difficulty. Please share those, because, you know, the more examples that we can share. I mean, Claire's got 3 very different examples over the years, but you know, if we can share other people's examples as well to help us when we're talking about these things and just support what we're saying, it's,
if we can do that, then that normalizes, because sometimes you don't realize that that is what it is until someone says, do you know what's happening there? You know, and had I not had this wonderful OT called Maggie, who took the time to see what's happening there, because she was genuinely fascinated with her job. That's what's happening there, that's what she's doing there. And then I got it, then I understood it and seen the power of it and how it is at the core of everything. As a human, it's at the core of everything. So,
and it's the reason why a lot of these children are disengaged from education as well. It's the reason why they have difficulty in the classroom. It's the reason why they find it very, very challenging to be in a mainstream setting. And that's something that we'll get into as well, because to be perfectly honest with you, the last time I stood in a primary school classroom, a mainstream primary school classroom, I was so overwhelmed that I was struggling to hold the conversation that I was having for the reason that I was in that room. So, you know, that's something that we'll definitely be delving into, because, you know, it has such a significant impact, and there's a lot that we can do. There's a lot that's impossible to change, unfortunately. There's a lot of things that you just can't control and that will always come out of nowhere, but if you have an understanding of this in all other aspects, you can manage the response.
And I would say, as the mother of 3 children who have sensory processing differences and FASD, this truly is an area where you can make a massive difference. You can influence their mood, their frame of mind. You can turn situations around with the sensory stuff. Like, it's a no-brainer. And that's why I get so excited about sharing it with people, because it can make instant difference. It can turn things around in an instant. So, but we'll go into that a little bit further the next time we talk about the sensory stuff. But we just wanted to kind of address it and let everyone know that it is a huge, huge part of living with FASD.
It's huge, and I'm surprised that we've got to, you know, the second half of season 2 before really delving into it. But yeah, please don't underestimate the impact of sensory, because we'll see over the next few episodes. We'll really
it's going to be exciting, because it's positive. It's all positive stuff. Because I think we often feel like, what can we do to help? What can we do to make life a little bit easier for them, to make things easier to tolerate and to manage? And all of these things that we're going to talk about, these are the things that we can do to make life easier and more manageable for them, and understand them better. Because when you're meeting their needs, you know, my kids refer to it as, oh, they would talk about a teacher, oh, she knows how to do models, she knows how to do us. That, and it's all to do with sensory. So that is how at the core of everything it is. So thank you very much for listening to us this week, and we hope you come back next week. Don't forget to get in touch with us on any of our social media platforms if you've got examples or anything that you want us to talk about with regards to sensory processing, or anything else that comes into your mind. We'd love to hear from you.
Definitely. Thank you.